Good morning and welcome to the Black Pill Radio Show. I'm your host, Mr. Tyler, and today we are discussing teaching while black. We're going to be discussing about a book that has been written and a documentary that is in production. And when we talk about that term, teaching while black, what exactly does that mean? So I have two guests who are on the panel today, and they're going to discuss that first question. But first, I'm going to have them introduce themselves briefly, and then after that, we'll go into the question. So Pamela, we'll start with you first.
Hi, guys. So my name is Pamela Lewis. I've been teaching in New York City. This is my 16th year teaching. I've taught all kinds of subject matters in both special education and general education, elementary school through high school. So I have, lots of different experiences. And I wrote the book because basically through the different schools that I've taught in, I've noticed that there's predominantly white, typically women who teach in predominantly black and brown schools. And I just felt like I needed to express my particular point of view in respect to some of the things that happen within our education system.
Excellent. And we'll get deeper into that. So now let's introduce Leticia.
Good morning. My name is Leticia Dickerson. I'm a Chicago native as well as an educator in the area, turned documentary filmmaker. I have a little over two decades of experience working with Chicago's public schools, first as a teacher, then as a new teacher coach, and currently as an independent educational consultant. I am the director and producer of a docuseries called Teaching While Black that explores what it means to be a black teacher in Chicago's public schools.
Excellent. So let's answer the question, teaching while black. Pamela, what does that mean when you say teaching while black?
Right. Well, for me, when I wrote my memoir, it has a few different connections and reasons as to why I made the title so. So obviously, the obvious being that I am black, a black woman, and so it's about my experiences teaching while black. The different things that has happened to me, and as a result of, in my opinion, being African American in the school system, but also it means it's basically how I see what I bring to the table. So because I am African American, because I am from the community in which I serve, I feel like I have a certain gift, I guess you would say. I have a certain point of view, a certain connectivity to the children that other teachers from other, areas that come into our communities don't have. So it's not just about my experience, but also what it means to be a black woman from the community who happens to teach in this community. So that's basically where it came from.
And Leticia, your documentary, Teaching While Black, what does that mean, like the title of that?
What it means for the documentary is, I guess I need to start kind of with a statistic. Chicago in the last couple of decades has experienced a sharp decline in the number of black teachers in Chicago public schools. Around 2000, 40% of the teachers in our district were African American. By 2017, we're at a 2%. And that definitely is alarming, is a problem. And thinking about my own departure from full-time classroom teaching, I wanted to take an opportunity to explore those stories and the reasons why this was happening. Chicago is a very segregated city, so when you have black schools, you have schools that are hyper majority minority. So if you have a school that's in a black neighborhood, more than likely it's all black students, and there were a time that mostly they were all black teachers. So I just really wanted to take a moment to think about and unpack what was needed to help retain black teachers in the classroom. So through the stories of 5 teachers, I'm exploring five possible reasons why we may be losing teachers here from the classroom.
So,
So that's kind of what teaching while black means, what it means for me. Just giving an opportunity and a platform for current educators to tell their stories and to illuminate reasons why they stay and reasons why they might not stay.
so Pamela, when you were working on your memoir and putting together the book, what was the feedback like
Hmm.
from fellow teachers and the administration?
Well, of course, the feedback varied depending on who was reading the book. I've gotten lots of trolls as expected. um, but, I wrote it and, you know, basically my intention was for the most part to just have on record a memoir that was written by an African American woman who was from the community, because I noticed that there were lots of memoirs coming out from white teachers about their experiences teaching black and brown children. So I wrote it just so that there could actually be on record something coming from someone like myself. And with that said, I was very unapologetic about it. So I knew that there would be people that would not agree with what I was saying, or would feel, some level of would possibly be on the defensive to some extent. But I did so knowing that, and knowing that it didn't matter to me. I also wrote it for other teachers of color because I knew I wasn't the only one going through what I was going through. So I wanted it to resonate with them just so that they knew that they weren't alone. But there has been a handful, I would say, of non-people of color who really was able to digest the book and were very grateful for me writing it. But at the same time, those type of individuals I would expect to have that kind of reaction because they were already open-minded white people. So it's not like I wanted to change the minds of certain people. I was very much open with knowing that certain people would not like what I have to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. So there was very much, you know, two different reactions, I would say, that I got from both people of color and non-people of color.
So, can you tell us a little bit or give us a snippet from the book that is important for parents? Because right now, parents are about to send their kids to school in New York City public school system
Hmm.
this coming week. And based on your teaching experience in the New York City public school system, what advice or one piece of advice would you give to the parents entering a child into the school system this year?
Absolutely. So one thing I would definitely say is to make sure that you're always an advocate for your child. I know that in my experience, I've seen several cases in which parents felt some level of inadequacy even stepping foot into the school because of either preconceived notions sometimes, or because of the way that they've been treated by either administration or other teachers, and that either may have made them not want to be as involved as they needed to be, or in some cases they were involved, but they were, they always had like an adverse reaction to the system in general. And basically, I feel like it's the responsibility of the teachers and the administration to win them over. Sometimes parents can be very difficult, I'm not going to lie. But knowing that, that's why you need to have a certain staff and an administration who's willing to go above and beyond to get the trust that they need from the parents, because it takes a village, as we all say, right? It's not like it's going to be something that we can do on our own as educators, because we need we need them. But at the same time, it's our job to make sure that they feel comfortable the same way that it's our job to make sure that the actual children feel comfortable. So I would just advise parents to just constantly be an advocate for their child, and make sure that regardless of their feelings about their teachers or the school itself, that they always put their children first, whatever that means. So don't say, okay, well, I can't stand this teacher because this teacher might be a problem. But if so, then that doesn't mean that you need to step away. There has to be something that maybe the school can have some kind of conflict resolution situation between you and the teacher. Whatever it is that they need to do it for you, but never step away because of the fact that are butting heads with administration or with with the staff. Maybe you have a particular teacher that you don't like. You should always put your children first. That would be my main thing, because I realize that a lot of times that it's because of the way that these parents are feeling that makes them step away. So.
Got it. So parents, make sure you step up and be involved in your child's life from day one when it comes to the public school system, whether it be the teacher or the administration. You got to stay involved. Leticia, I want to come to you about the documentary. I know it's a work in progress and you're still building onto it, but what has the feedback been so far from school staff as well as school administrators and even the parents?
Wow, definitely. Overall, the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. The teachers that are participating in it are excited and definitely wanting to move forward. Parents, people that I know that are parents with children in CPS have definitely had aha moments and having an opportunity to kind of hear these inner dialogues that teachers, not just Black teachers, just teachers in general have made public or put on camera, I think have made parents more empathetic to what happens during the course of a school day and all the decisions that teachers have to make for those 30 or 35 students that are sitting in front of them. As far as administrators and district officials, that's what I'm working towards. The schools that I've been in, administrators have responded very positively, have given me unprecedented, just the access that they have given me to their schools and to the teachers that I'm following has been awesome. However, Chicago is a large school district. I think we're the third or the fourth large. It kind of goes back and forth school district in the nation. And the Chicago public schools and the charter schools in the city want to control their narrative. So it's been for me as a filmmaker and as an educator who's worked with a lot of different schools and some of these schools in different capacities, it's been an interesting dance of back and forth of figuring out what access means as a documentary filmmaker who happens to also be an educator. A lot of relationship building, a lot of trust building, and I think me coming from the background of being an educator definitely helps that. Ideally, I would want just full access and permissions to do what we're doing. But as you know, as a filmmaker, I'm working towards that. So still trying to build that district and administrator relationship and trust around the project.
So there's a great documentary on Stars. It's called America to Me. I don't know if you guys ever heard of it, but it's a documentary that's taking place in the Chicago school system at one particular school. I think it's called Oak Park. And they're talking about a lot of the racial tensions and the racial segregation and things that are going on in the school and the history of the city and the school system and Black children in the school. So it's a really interesting documentary I think everybody should see. But one of the things I've noticed is teachers wanting to be on camera. So when you're working on your documentary, do you have any issues with teachers wanting to go on camera, speaking about their trials and tribulations, working with the children, the parents in the school system? Or do you find it's been easy to get teachers to come on camera?
That's a great question. So I want to back up a little bit and talk just a little bit about America to Me. The film company that produced that, Hartemquin Films, is based here in Chicago, and they do a Diverse Voices and Documentary Fellowship every year for filmmakers of color who are producing films that deal with social issues, social justice concerns. I had the pleasure in 2017 of being one of those fellows and being in this think tank with all these amazing producers, directors, Gordon Quinn as, artistic director of Cartemplin, giving advice on how to get interviews, how to have access. So that was a great space to kind of incubate and think about some of the things that you're asking me about right now about teachers being on film. Surprisingly, that was not my problem. I think teaching is such a kind of you go in your classroom and close the door type of profession, and it's kind of egg crate where down the hallway all teaching is going on in every room, but it's just you and the young people that you're serving. I think they were really excited to have an opportunity to be on camera and to talk openly and candidly about the things that they're experiencing. So didn't have any shyness or hesitation with the teachers that I selected, which went from, a young lady who is a pre-service teacher, not even in the classroom yet, all the way up to a 20-plus year veteran in our district. So everyone was definitely open and honest and reflective. And honestly, at every interview session that we did, you needed Kleenex. Like someone was bound to cry. If it was me, a crew member, a teacher, someone was definitely going to cry and have to take a break during the interview. So that just let me know that teachers are full of emotion and just looking for opportunities to get their stories out, be it film or video or writing, blogging. Like we just need more opportunities for people to share what they're doing, especially when they are working in what can be sometimes a very isolating profession.
Got it. And the documentary is very powerful, and I want to see you continue, and I'm going to help you with that as well. So I want to move the question to Pamela. As far as your memoir, do you plan on publishing a part 2? Do you plan on doing anything video related to the current memoir or something in the future?
It's funny that you said that because I was literally having a conversation with someone yesterday, and I've been hearing a lot of people asking me about doing a part 2. And in terms of material, I definitely have enough because the book has been out for a couple of years now, and I've had different experiences after that. And unfortunately, with respect to some of the unfortunate things that I discussed in the book, that have not changed, even with, a change in administration in schools. I'm starting to realize that no matter where I go, there's going to be an issue because basically schools are just a microcosm of society in general. So just like we turn on the news and, we might see lots of wonderful things happening, we constantly are faced against, we constantly see the same issues, happening in society with respect to, let's say, for example, police brutality, or these permit patties, which I, really have started to, those things are really starting to resonate with me because every time I see them on TV, it just reminds me of the permit patties that exist within our schools, calling authority for on children or on teachers of color for, the most trivial reasons, or being intimidating to teachers of color or to children. So these things continue to happen. And like I said, there's really, and we just discussed this earlier too, where there's like a situation where teachers of color, it's hard to retain them because, and I think a lot of it has to do with issues like that. So I definitely have enough material to talk about. The question is whether I want to continue talking about things that are happening within the schools while I'm still working in the schools, because there's usually sometimes there's conflicts of interest. Even with this particular book, I had to have a waiver signed, and there was a lot of drama surrounding me even being able to publish it in the first place. It wasn't something like that was easy and just handed to me like, oh yeah, you want to write a book? Sure. I had to really have my publicist and the press that I'm working with, the Fordham University and Oxford University Press. We had to have lawyers involved and have back and forth conversations just so that I can even get the book published. Because I'm not necessarily shining positive light necessarily on the things that are happening. So of course, it's not going to be given to me just quite so easily. You know what I mean? So I definitely have material. I'm just not sure if I want to write that while I'm still in the position that I'm in. For those of people that have read the book, I end pretty much saying that I'm leaving. Actually, the story is kind of like a love story, the way that I wrote it. And when I started writing it, I had all intentions of leaving. But at the end of the day, I just couldn't leave the kids, and I'm still here right now. I don't know how long that's going to last, but as far as it stands now, I'm still in the same, I'm still teaching. So, after and I move on to something else, then I may think about writing a part two.
All right, sounds good. So let's move it on to Leticia with the documentary that you're working on. I know it's a work in progress, so where do you see yourself going with the documentary?
Where I see myself going with the documentary is producing a 5-part series that's digitally distributed. That was a mouthful early this morning. And I want to make sure that all the stories that are presented are candid and raw and allow a viewer to really unpack what's needed to understand the problem of retention of Black teachers in Chicago. And I think, honestly, that if you understand the problem here, it's applicable to other situations, be it, a New York or LA. Last night I was doing some internet research and even see that this is an issue in Europe and London. Like, that, we're having issues with recruiting and retaining Black teachers. Immediate goals are really, thinking about producing a pilot episode. There are a couple of teacher stories that are definitely, anytime anyone watches the preview, they talk about certain teachers. So definitely wanted to capture and take advantage of that momentum and capture those teachers in action. And produce a pilot episode to be released in early 2019, maybe a 15-minute episode. As a film producer, thinking about funding for this project, thinking about partnerships for this project. What does that look like? So I'm working with my very talented crew and producer and assistant to start to launch a social media campaign around the project that just kind of gives an introduction to teaching while Black and understanding how we're defining that problem in Chicago. Not really a problem, we take that back, defining that opportunity to explore and build upon that in Chicago.
Got it. So both you guys mentioned about retaining teachers of color, Black teachers. What is the problem with that? Why are Black teachers supposedly leaving the profession sooner or earlier than they should be? Maybe not teaching all the way to retirement. What is the issue with that? I'll throw that question to Pamela first.
Well, like I even said, I even, thought about leaving myself, which is what prompted me to write the book in the first place. And I think any teacher, whether you're, regardless of the color of your skin, it's a difficult profession. I mean, it's got so many great things about it, but it's probably, in my opinion, one of the most difficult jobs there is, aside from, motherhood. And I think that especially when you're teaching in communities that are not being provided with adequate resources and have, all these problems that no one's addressing, it just makes it even harder. So that's like the second double whammy. Teaching in general is hard. Teaching in these communities is especially hard. Then when you put on top of that, someone who's a teacher of color, and in my case, someone who comes from the community, it's very personal. Not to say that if you're a white teacher, it can't be personal, but I just, if you would try to tell me that you feel the same that I do, I would beg to differ with you. You know what I mean? Like I'm not only black, but I'm from, like, not necessarily the same projects, but I come from Edenwald projects in the Bronx. So when I've taught in other communities that have kids that come from Forest projects, McKinley projects, Grant projects in Harlem, those kids are me. And when I see them struggling, I see it in a different way than I think someone who comes from, like, Schenectady or Chappaqua or wherever they live. Kids, teachers that are coming from Westchester or what have you. So it's heartbreaking. It's another level of heartbreak to experience the struggle that the kids are going through. That's one thing. But then on top of that, you have the bureaucracy that is really so imposing on teachers, all teachers, where a lot of times we feel as though our hands are tied. And I think that if you're someone, like, in my opinion, if you're black and you live in a world that does that to you already, I know for me, I could say that it definitely gives me a level of angst that I don't think my fellow, white teachers experience on the same level. I know that I've definitely felt that, it's just so frustrating to have an administrator or, in a lot of cases, teachers who are on the same level as me treat me as though they're my superior. And the only reason that I could see that is because they're white and they feel as though they have some level of something, like something up on me. And, I could say definitely that if there's another sister that's teaching with me, we definitely have had moments where we just give each other the eye. Like, did you see that? You know what I mean? And constantly dealing with microaggressions and things like that, on top of the things that any teacher already has to deal with, it's very frustrating. So a lot of times, and even for myself, what I have to tell myself just to even stay is to think about the kids, because if you're dealing with those microaggressions, those children are dealing with it too. And a lot of times they need us. They need us to be there more than anyone else, to support them, to have their back when no one else does.
So when you're in the classroom, do you find that a lot of the black teachers get the students who struggle more? They don't get the opportunity to teach the advanced classes and things like that. How is it decided which children you teach, what classrooms you teach in?
Right. Well, in elementary schools, at least in New York City, they don't typically track children anymore. And so all the classes are very mixed in terms of ability level. So we don't really have that experience. But I think on a high school level, and I have heard, like, for example, AP classes, I've heard teachers of color complain about that, where, they give certain classes to the white teachers or stuff like that. But in my case, that hasn't really necessarily been the issue. But I do know that even though there's mixed ability within the classes, a lot of times African American teachers or black teachers in general are seen as the disciplinarians. So that could mean different things in different places. It could mean that they put them in the special education classes, or it could be that they're a general ed class, just like another teacher is a general ed class, but they put certain children in her classroom because they think she can handle him. And there's been cases where, classes have, students within the class have been switched, or because they feel as though, oh, well, I can't deal with him. You take him. But a lot of times the teachers are like, give him to me. If you can't handle him, I will. If you can't love him, I will. I had a kid in my class this year. I wasn't given a child because I was a better disciplinarian. It just so happened that the teacher was a special education teacher, and it was a self-contained class, and this little girl was being mainstreamed into general ed. So they put her in my class with the other general ed kids. And I was told to watch out for her because she was such a problem child. And I didn't have any problems with her, like, at all. And all year I can't believe you were able to handle her. What did you do? You're a magician. And it's like, no, I just loved her. And I just gave her a certain level of structure and support. And I also have a zero tolerance policy in my classroom. So she knew not to come at me with the foolishness. But at the same time, she knew that I loved her. And because of that relationship that I was able to build with her, she was a different person in my classroom. So, a lot of times those kids are given to the teachers of color because they feel they can handle them. But While some teachers may complain about that, in my case, I'm like, bring them on. Bring them to me because they need to be taught and they need to be loved.
Excellent. So, Leticia, same question with you and your experience. Why are we losing black teachers? Why is it hard to retain black teachers?
So I'm going to start, I think, at the beginning of the pathway to becoming a teacher and think about a high school student who's interested in education and enters their public university in their area in the teacher preparation program. And the hurdles that he or she might experience in just getting into the College of Education, passing the certification exams that allows them to be formally admitted to the program and start education classes and student teaching. So one of the young women that's featured in the docuseries, Melanie, that's her story. Like, she has experienced a constant hurdle with even being formally admitted to the teacher preparation program because she is struggling with the math portion of the basic skills test. This is a young lady that is a product of the Chicago Public Schools, and her education experiences have not, she's very passionate about wanting to teach, but this is a hurdle that even prevents entry into where we prepare and train our teachers. I'm going to go a little further along in the pathway and think about the new teachers, the young teachers that I've had the pleasure of supporting for a decade or so. When you come into the teaching profession, you are very bright-eyed and optimistic, and you're excited about what's going to happen. And by October, you're just like, oh boy, what have I gotten myself into? So we're not supporting people who enter the profession in a realistic way to be prepared for the complexities of urban teaching. I've had instances where I've coached 30 beginning teachers in a school year, and by November, when they go home to their families and explain what's going on, they leave. And this actually, this is something that happens. They go and they seek other opportunities because the working conditions are not what they expected and to support them to do the hard work that Pamela mentioned that teaching requires. If you go a little further along in the pathway, you have 7 to 10 year teachers who are considered veterans. That's insanity to me. How can they be considered veterans? They're put into these leadership positions in a school, and they're burnt out. You're asking them to, and if they're a black teacher, kind of going back to what Pamela mentioned, they're seen as a disciplinarian, and we can't even begin to talk about the complexities of being a black male teacher in a building. You're seen in all kind of ways that you might not want to be in those positions, especially if you're early in your career. Year 7 is not a barrier. Not a veteran. And these are barriers as well to thinking about, like, why do I even want to stay in this profession? It's not financially lucrative. I'm trying to raise a family. So you have people who are leaving the classroom maybe to go to other professions or seeking paid leadership opportunities at that point. I've talked to quite a few teachers who are in years 3 and 4 who are enrolling in principal preparation programs. Feedback from that has been very mixed because, again, at years 3 to 7, you're still mastering your craft as a teacher. So those are some of the things that can happen, like, individually with teachers, but then thinking about Chicago. Pamela mentioned earlier that schools are microcosms of cities and communities. Chicago is a very segregated city. We've had the pleasure of being able, with Teaching While Black, to interview some of the black education professors in the city. And David Stovall from the University of Illinois Chicago calls Chicago a hyper-segregated city. And it very much is. So if you have a hyper-segregated city, pretty much meaning with schools, you have schools that are all black, housing in around the school that are all black, which means that the teaching staff are predominantly black. So then if you go back a few years and you think about what happened in Chicago we had a situation where 50 schools were closed, and these schools were closed on the south and the west side of the city. These were predominantly black and brown communities. Who taught at these schools? Predominantly black and brown teachers who are now out of work because of school closures. So it's a very interesting situation from a micro level of thinking about what's happening for me as a teacher in my individual school building with individual students and administrators, all the way up to a macro level of like how does the policies and initiatives of the city impact my ability to stay within this profession. So, you have a variety of factors: poor working conditions, discriminatory hiring practices, school closures, barriers to entry for teacher preparation programs. All that contributes to the decline of black teachers in Chicago.
So you mentioned the male black teacher. What's going on with the male black teachers?
Where they at?
Is it that black males don't want to teach, or they don't want to hire black males, or black males teach and leave early? Like, what's the situation? You guys are in the classroom.
I mean, I'm not a black male, so I can't necessarily speak for them. I just know that in elementary school, I mean, again, with everything we discussed, there's probably a million factors for everything, right? So I don't want to generalize and say this is the reason. But just thinking about what potential reasons there could be, I know that there aren't really that many men in elementary school. I'm talking about elementary school because that's where I'm teaching right now. It's where I've taught most of my time. But in elementary school, there's not that many men in general. And the thing I can think about that with is pretty much men are seen as too strong, maybe, or too scary or something, because they're not nurturers. Which is a stereotype, of course, right? But if that's the stereotype that we're going to go with, then you're not going to have that many men in general in an elementary school setting. So now put it together and put a black man on top of that. So if we think men are too scary, what do you think they think about black men in elementary school? I don't think it's so much that the black men are not trying to get into those schools. I think that schools don't want black men in general. At least not in elementary school. Now, when you get to middle and high school, that's when you start seeing black men. That's when you start seeing men in general, because now they want them to be strong. They want the disciplinarian factor, those type of things. But in elementary school, you typically don't see any men. In most, at least in any of the schools that I've taught and in schools that my friends have taught in, that's not something that you see a lot of. And if you do see them, they're usually in administrative roles. They're not going to be a kindergarten teacher. Usually. So I think if we look at men as scary and non-nurturing, then black men are really being looked at in that way even more. So it's not something that people are necessarily, when they're going out and looking for to hire people. I don't think the typical principal is trying to find a black man to come into their schools, unless you're a principal who understands that black men are needed for our children. And I know a couple of black educators who are administrators who seek out black men because they understand that our black boys need them and our black girls need them. But if you don't have that mindset, typically I don't think they're even looking for them in the first place.
So Leticia, what's your take on that in terms of black male teachers being involved in the school system and in the classroom?
Oh, wow. I am by no means a researcher or an expert, but through this development of this documentary, I had the pleasure of talking with experts, and reading tons of stuff. And the one thing that I can lift up from some of the expert interviews that I've done is the feminization of the teaching profession that happened a long time ago. Teaching is a female-dominated profession. I do not have all the historical knowledge to say how that transition has happened over time, but that's typically what it is. And I personally feel that the salaries kind of reflect that. I've had the pleasure of being able to find two male teachers to follow for this. When I saw them in the buildings that I visited, and they work at the elementary level still, upper grade, so middle school, I was like, well, who are these black unicorns? Like, have this narrative out there that there are not enough black male teachers. And then I walked into a building, and I kid you not, like the entire middle school upper grades here, because we don't have traditional middle schools here really in Chicago. So 6th, 7th, and 8th grade was all male teaching staff pretty much. And I'm just like, whoa, I must plant myself in the camera here. And in talking to them, they've definitely talked about their families and wanting to be able to provide for their families and aspiring to do other things that would possibly take them out of the classroom into more leadership roles. And those decisions were attached to earnings for their families. So I think if you want to attract more quality candidates to teaching, period, not even just males, but, definitely thinking about males if they're in a traditional family structure where they are expected to be providers, we have to think about how we compensate and reward teachers, especially if, we're thinking about understaffed schools where we want more males to be. There just have to be some other ways that we think about attracting them and compensating them as well. But I think it really just all goes back to the feminization of this profession. It's, that's happened over time.
So when you talk about the feminization, are you also speaking about black males being feminine in the classroom as well? That they don't, Pamela mentioned, black men being big and scary. Are they looking for black men that are more like feminine?
No, that's definitely not what I'm talking about. I definitely want to clarify that. Just feminization of the teaching profession, meaning that factors and policies started to change over time where the structures and the compensation was set up for single females to work. If you go back and you think about some of the earlier schools, like there were single women who were teachers that lived with families and couldn't be seen, outside of the school, just kind of wandering town. Like, these were the kind of things that were happening. It was just geared towards, it was more women who taught. And again, I want to say I'm not a researcher, and this is an angle that I'm still unpacking. So I'm going to put it there, pin in it there. I'm definitely not saying the feminization of black men in any way. I want to be clear about that.
Got it. So I'm going to move on to Pamela. When we talk about racism, right, that's the structure of systems that are used from one group to oppress another. Do you see that in the educational system, specifically New York City public educational system, and how has that affected you personally in the classroom?
Right. So absolutely. I think that is, basically what my book is, focused on in terms of like my struggle. Yes, there's some things that I may have discussed that are other struggles, but the predominant struggle is the racism that pervades educational systems, at least what I experienced. And from what I see, like, I'm not from Chicago, but we see the news, and we, Leticia just discussed a little bit of that where, the black and brown schools are the ones that are being shut down. In New York City, or at least in what I try to kind of focus on in the book is, like I said, the microcosms and individual case-by-case situations that I've experienced. But systematically, if you look at that on a whole, let's think about all the white teachers that are being hired to teach in black and brown communities and are totally out of touch. Let's talk about the way that there are white teachers, usually typically women, because we said that we already discussed how it's already more women in this profession, how white teachers who've only taught for a couple of years are able to move up and become leaders and become principals and administrators with little experience. And then let's talk about how we have administration who, are, white teachers who sometimes are even in their 20s still leading a group of veteran black teachers who've been teaching for 20 plus years, right? These are things that you see often in school settings across the country. And that's just one example, but I could give you so many examples of how, again, just seeing that microcosm of society happening on a smaller level within a school building or within a school district, that, you just are reminded every day that racism is alive and well. Another example, just to give you one, when you see that all the special ed children are black and brown, when you see that most of them are black boys, and when you think about why children are placed in special education to begin with. And as I said, of course, there are some that need to be in special education. And I'm not saying that everyone that's placed in special education doesn't belong there. But I have 2 licenses. I can teach special education and I can teach general education. And I could tell you that when I first started, I was appointed as a special education teacher. When I first taught a general education class, I was surprised to see how many kids were just as low as the special education children. So it's not like the kids that are being placed in special education necessarily need to be there, because if their colleagues, or not their colleagues, but if their peers are performing on the same level as them, why are they being placed there then? If they're able to perform and still be in general education, why is this black boy being placed in special education? And when you think about it, some of the factors are that the teacher put him there. The teacher asked for an evaluation. So now we have to think about who's teaching him. And did that teacher give him a fair shot? When you think about one of the reasons why a child is placed in special education is because of not just because of their learning disabilities, but because of their behavior. So when we start talking about behavior, now we need to think about, well, is that child really as misbehaved and as emotionally disturbed as they say, or is this from the perspective of the white teacher that placed him there? So, there's just so many factors that constantly remind us that racism is alive and well in education. And if I told you them all, we'd be here all day. So definitely.
So on a police force, they have a separate black union where black police officers are together to discuss issues that face them specifically and directly. Have black school teachers done something like that?
I haven't had any formal, but I've seen informally, groups that come together to kind of like help each other out or to discuss it. I'm sure there's something that I may not be aware of. Sometimes I'm kind of a lone wolf, so I'll be honest, I haven't necessarily looked into it myself. But there's definitely spaces. And even things, I've even seen things as informal as on social media. There's, Black Teachers Rock and, all these different groups that come together because we often feel like we need a community of our own just to be able to survive in this climate, especially with the things that are happening now, under this presidency. And you'd be surprised how many of those opinions flare up and the things that you hear coming out of teachers' mouths or just attitudes changing even because of the particular climate that's, happening right now. So I think we commune as much as we can. And even within a school building, like if you have, a predominantly white school building, just like any other profession, by the way, where you see like there's another sister there, like you guys want to get together and you want to kind of help each other and vent to one another because you need a support system. So, I mean, we need to probably get it together a little, because even if I haven't looked into something, if it's not something that's like right, glaring in my face, I would say it's not necessarily strong enough, or the force is not big enough, because otherwise I would have known about it without me having to look into it. So, I mean, I haven't seen anything that, in terms of like, a group of black people, black teachers, black educators coming together on a level that it needs to be. I think we have to do a lot better, because the problems that are happening in terms of how black teachers are being treated, how black students are being treated, we definitely need to do better to try to make something, to make a bigger point, or a bigger issue about it. I wrote a book, but that's just one book, and there are other people that have written books. Leticia's writing, you're doing a documentary, but I would love to see us all come together in a stronger way.
Yeah, I think if black teachers unified throughout the states,
Right.
we have more progress and things would get done. Creating social media groups are cool for like emotional support and that kind of thing. But in terms of
Right.
dictating policy and hiring and things like that, it's really going to take some legal action. Similar to Colin Kaepernick,
Mhm.
somebody just got to step up and make it happen.
Right.
So, Leticia, when we talk about racism,
Absolutely.
and I know you mentioned Chicago being really segregated, how does that affect you personally in your efforts in the classroom and outside of the classroom when you're working with educators?
How does it affect me personally? It's something that I always keep in mind. When I go into schools to do work, when I walk buildings, I find myself starting to peer through classroom windows and starting to count. That's kind of even how I started to think about the documentary. Like, there was a high school building that I went in on the north side of Chicago, and I just started to count how many black teachers were in classrooms. I didn't see any, but I saw paraprofessionals, I saw security staff, cafeteria staff. And it's just something I always keep in mind when I'm working. And I also keep in mind that I never want to be the voice. Like, I've been pulled often and asked questions and asked to do work where I could quickly tell, like, oh, you want me to speak for all black teachers and all black people on the south side of Chicago, and I can't do that. Black people are not monolithic. We're multifaceted, multidimensional. We come from a myriad of experiences. It's just not one way. So that's something that I always um, keep in mind. A lot like Pamela, as I work and travel, if I see other onlys in a building or in an educational organization, I definitely extend an olive branch and try to form alliances with those people to kind of start those informal networks. Chicago is an interesting place in that we do have a very active teaching union. The Chicago Teacher Union, which was recently led by Karen Lewis, an amazing black educator and activist who recently stepped down due to health issues. She's the president emeritus of the Teachers Union. But they have a black caucus. They have an organized space for black teachers to come for that emotional support, but also to think about how to be strategic with some of the policy needs around black teachers in the city. So I have to say, as I travel, just as Leticia, citizen of Chicago, to, in an educator space or in a filmmaker space, I'm always thinking about race. And you can't, for me in my experience, you can't help but to think about it when you're in a city that is so segregated. Like, the neighborhood I currently live in is very segregated, but it's experiencing some shifts and some changes, which does bring other people, class, differences as well as racial. But typically, I I travel my neighborhood and shop and eat with people who look like me. And that's just been, So when I step out of this space and go into other spaces, it's startling because you notice that you might be one of the only people,
Got it.
Black people, people of color. Yeah.
Got it. So, Pamela, what's next for you? You wrote one memoir. You're thinking about a second one. You say you have material for a second one. Are you looking at speaking engagements as well? And are you thinking about leaving a classroom and doing something different?
Right. So I tried for literally a year to do something different, which is just coaching. And not to say I would never do it again, but I chose to go back into the classroom this past year because I realized that I've had more experiences, as I said, where I felt as though because I was Black, I was treated a certain way. And when you're dealing, like when you're a coach, for example, you have to deal with more adults, obviously. So I'm used to being able to just go into the classroom and deal with my children. And children are innocent, children are beautiful. And I'm working in the community, so I'm working with Black and brown children. I feel safe, I feel comfortable. Going into outside, within the profession, but outside the classroom, means that I have to deal with teachers, those teachers being teachers who are not necessarily of color, administrators who are not necessarily of color, and it's the issues are even more blaring. So I made the decision to go back into the classroom for now because it's a safe space for me. And I would ultimately like to open up my own school, preferably not within the Department of Education, because I feel then I would still be being controlled, and that's not necessarily something I'm interested in. But my ultimate goal is to open up my own school, an Afrocentric school for Black and brown children that teaches them not just the things that we already teach them curriculum-wise, but to go beyond that and teach them things that they need growing up as an African American or as a Black or brown child living in America, in the America that we experience and that we live and we suffer and we struggle through but still thrive. I think that we need to give our children more, aside from the obvious, which is that our curriculum doesn't necessarily stress some of the things that, even when you think about history, like the history of our people is not explained and is not studied. Or the way in which even things that did happen, like slavery, the way slavery is just told very matter-of-factly as opposed to being inspiring and life-altering. There's a certain way that I would like to teach my students, our students, and I don't think that that's necessarily going to be done fully the way I would like to, as long as I'm teaching within this Department of Education. So ultimately, that's where I want to look into in terms of trying to open up my own school.
And where can
And
people
then
buy
I
your
write,
book?
I'm a writer.
Where can
I'm
people
sorry,
buy your book?
say that again.
Where can people
You
purchase your
can
book?
buy it on Amazon. It's in Barnes & Noble. It's in different college bookstores across the country. But the easiest place would be for you to just go online and get it.
90 seconds.
Got it. And 1 minute left. Leticia, what's next for you in terms of the documentary?
What's next is that we are in production for a pilot episode that we are looking to release in early 2019. Also, coupled with that, we will start a crowdfunding campaign for Teaching While Black. In the meanwhile, we are building our social media presence, and you can find us
60
on
seconds.
Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under Teaching While Black. And also, you can see the preview on our social media sites, or you can check out the preview on Vimeo under Teaching While Black.
Excellent. Thank you, ladies, for joining the broadcast. I really appreciate it. I'm going to send out some social media posts regarding the book and the documentary. And once you have the crowdfunding ready, let me know so I can post that out. As always, tune in to the Black Pill Radio Show. You can go to blackpillradio.com to see some of the episodes. We also have video lessons from different Black professionals who are preaching and teaching about different things that you guys need to learn and know through video. So definitely check us out. As always, every first and third Sunday of the month from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Time, we are live. Thank you, ladies.
10 seconds.
And we will
Thank
see you
you.
guys in 2 weeks.
Thank you.